we need to, as Christians empowered by the Spirit, we need to move beyond our numbers, move beyond our, I don't know what Myers-Briggs calls them. Yeah. Like, we need to move beyond those letters and just be like, no, ultimately Christ defines me. Maybe this is like one little stop on that trek, but I can't let this just be the stop.
Not use it to enable yourself to not grow or to continue to sin or anything like that. Don't use Don't use this new knowledge, don't use your freedom to justify your sinning.
All right, guys, welcome back to Foothill Studio Conversations. I mean, you haven't really gone anywhere. You're just at home.
We assume you've just been sitting at the computer
just waiting for episode 16, which is this one.
Boom!
And we're talking about personality tests, a little more specifically the Enneagram, because it is something kind of big in Christian culture, and maybe just culture in general, but... I talked to my neighbor and he didn't know what it was. So,
okay.
So it's not that big. Sorry.
It's kind of cool, but it's not like that cool.
You have to be cool to know what's
Ouch. What does that say about my neighbor?
He's cool at a different level.
He's like a good neighbor.
Is this a good intro? I don't think it is. We're going to go with it.
I think this is great.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about this just because within Christian culture it seems to be relatively big. Historically, culturally speaking, personality tests and all that kind of stuff are pretty big, and a lot of people kind of look to them to get some insight on themselves. And so to start this one off, I just wanted to kind of ask you guys, what's your history as far as like personality tests or get to know yourself tests? Like, what are some that you've taken that you feel have been kind of formative in your life?
Let's start with our good friend Linnea.
Oh, that's me.
Oh yeah, Linnea's here.
Oh yeah, wait. I've taken like all of them, like all the personality tests. That,
BuzzFeed.
those are like my. I love those.
Which Harry Potter character are you?
Which Friends character?
Oh yeah. Yes. What kind of treat do you relate to most?
Like, there was a period that I was like, it was swipe up on Facebook and I'd see like the BuzzFeed and I was like,
I am more like pie than cake. You're right.
Yes. That's bad. But like, yes. I've taken all of them, and I think they've all helped in different ways. They've all shown different things.
Okay. Is there one that you would, let's just choose one, that you would say, I learned this about myself? I
learned from, like, the Myers-Briggs, I learned about how I react more so. Like, with the Myers-Briggs and, like, the different personalities, it's like, you're either like a thinker or a feeler, and I was like, I'm a thinker. I think through my emotions, but I don't. I'm a feeler, and I let them all out, and it's good to let them out, but it's also like it was that understanding that like just because I process it in here doesn't. It also does show when I'm reacting. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's always like a reaction sort of piece is how do you handle a conflict first, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I always found this interesting.
What about you, Mark?
Let's see. I haven't done the BuzzFeed ones. Oh. I don't know if I'm a cake or a pie. Or a cupcake. Or a strudel.
You're a strudel.
Which I feel like strudel's just the cousin to pie, let's be honest. But I've done Enneagram stuff. This sounds like let me just tell you my dark past of all that I've done. I've done the Enneagram, you know.
Done Myers-Briggs.
When I was really low, I've done Myers-Briggs. Actually, those are the only two. We've done some like in-house staff stuff, which is not personality necessarily. It's more focused on like conflict resolution stuff. So SDI would be one of them. It's not a disease. And what was the other one that we did? Oh, I've done DISC as well before, which is more of like a leadership type thing. What's your leadership style? How do you do? Which all plays into personality, of course, but it's not like it's exclusively just focusing on yourself. It's how do you use this as a strength of yours? Oh, strength finders. That's one.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Haven't done that one yet.
Yeah, so I've done all of those. Really, like the popularized ones that everyone loved to talk about, and so like through college and all that stuff was Myers-Briggs, of course. And then after college for me is when Enneagram stuff started popping up, and I found that one was the most helpful, if anything, as far as just knowing yourself and figuring, like knowing other people and how they function, so you can kind of relate to them in a different light, as well as understand like why are you not reacting the same way I'm reacting to one situation or another. Yeah, so that's kind of my exposure.
I've honestly kind of just heard of all of these. Like most of them like cost money to do like a legitimate one, and I'm cheap, I guess, because I was like, yeah, I'm not. So like I would basically be like, hey Mark, give me the Cliff Notes, and you'd be like, well, this is it. I was like, okay, I guess I'm that or whatever. Like so, I would say the only like actual test kind of thing I took pre doing this Enneagram thing was like a spiritual gifts test. I took that, which I feel I struggle with tests because I know the outcome I want, and so a lot of times I bias my answer to it.
Yeah, totally.
So when I was a worship pastor / youth pastor, oddly enough, I got the teaching, leadership, and worship spiritual gifts. I was like,
Incredible.
what affirmation!
It's always better if
They
you don't
know
know
me.
what all the outcomes can really be or
Right.
what they stand for, so
Right.
that it's just I'll
Yeah.
figure it out at the end.
So spiritual gifts, and then I had read up a little bit on like introvert extrovert kind of stuff,
Right.
and that was when I realized that I'm a extroverted introvert. Like once I realized that I need my alone time or I collapse to allow me to be.
See, that already drives me insane that you said that. Because there is no such thing as an extrovert introvert. It's,
An
it's
outgoing introvert.
a sociable
An outgoing introvert.
Or, yeah, an
An
outgoing,
outgoing introvert.
high energy introvert. if
That's
you will.
what I.
But-
That's what I meant
See,
to say. Yeah.
I like categorize myself as an ambivert for like the longest time. So I was like, I'm not an introvert, but I'm also not an extrovert. But like,
Yeah.
because I need my alone time, but I also like I thrive off people and time with people, and like there is moments where I'm like, I can't be alone right now. I need to be with people, but like I still needed that balance, and so like.
Well, and I think we all need that balance regardless of like,
Sure.
it's all about your energy level. But at the end of the day, if you don't spend time alone, you're probably not going to be the most healthy, well-balanced, processed person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of it. I'm sorry, outgoing introvert for you. I need to be correct. So I don't have tons of history with it other than like I kind of know that they're a thing and people love them. And by the way, I don't want to fully lead this conversation because when it comes to specifically the Enneagram, which we can tilt towards and say,
Yeah, we got you.
I'm not the smartest. You guys are much more intelligent on it. What do you think it was about the Enneagram that benefited you better? Because you said that was the one that you felt like was most practically helpful.
Yeah.
or
Well,
whatever.
so I'll liken it with Myers-Briggs, whereas Myers-Briggs seems to be a more fluid sort of thing. Like you never really stick with one thing, which is fine. Like it's true of life that we kind of adapt and change and grow and all that kind of stuff. So like in college,
Hopefully.
yeah.
Hopefully we grow.
Like in college, I definitely became more, and I would say extroverted. Like I did start receiving a little bit more energy off of being with people and doing that kind of stuff. And then post college, like it was almost like an adaptive sort of. You kind of have no other choice but to figure that stuff out and figure out how to get energy in that system. And then post college, it came back to like, okay, I like my alone time. I like going home. Please stop talking to me for 12 hours max or minimum. That kind of stuff. So likening it to Myers-Briggs, which is fluid and always changing, Enneagram presented itself as like no, this is more of a formation like when you were growing up between the ages of like 3 and 5, I think. I don't remember entirely the range for that, but this is a thing that you learned of how to interface with the world in a way to cope with your surroundings and figure out how to survive, essentially. And so the Enneagram definitely spoke to me in a way that Myers-Briggs didn't, in that it got way more personal into your life and like your behaviors and how that all rolls out. So if we're gonna go across and say our types as well, because I think that's always fun to lock people in a box and never change it. I'm a type 9. Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a type 9. Hi, Mark.
Hi,
Okay.
Mark.
Oh, hi. Yeah, hi, Mark.
Alcoholics
I
Anonymous.
feel like
hi,
I know. I
Mark.
think about that when everyone asks about enneagrams. I'm like, it sounds like an AA meeting. We're like, hi.
Oh, you belong in that corner.
Yeah. You're like, you're in that box. Wow. Now I feel like I have to be like, hi, I'm Linnea. I'm a type 2.
That's great.
I just recently found out I was a type 2 as well.
Oh,
Woo,
no.
deuce.
Yeah.
There's going to be no conflict in this circle.
No.
But yeah, so like knowing
Oh, that's a helper?
helper.
I don't even
Helper.
know what it is.
Helper and
helper.
peacemaker. Just
We're
what do you
just
do?
the best.
What do you do?
The best numbers.
But so-
We're here to help.
So really what the Enneagram helped me understand was my relationship to conflict, which I always knew I had an adverse, like I was conflict avoidant, and I wore that as a badge for a long time. But the Enneagram sort of says, okay, this is why you do it, and you really should start showing up to conflicts because it's a part of being yourself, having an opinion, doing that kind of stuff. And so it became way more practical using that test over Myers-Briggs or anything else. Not that I think all of them are helpful to some degree, at least utilized as tools and not definitions of who we are as well. But,
We'll get to some of that kind of stuff.
yeah.
I think like from learning just learning the Enneagram and learning all the different like types and learning myself through that. It's like I used to like refer to myself all of the Myers-Briggs and was like, okay, I'm this, and this. I only can react in these certain ways. And then it was like, but I'm not reacting that way. And then it's like, but then like through the just reading all about the 2 basically. It was describing levels of myself that I wasn't willing to admit, and I was like, I'm not that person, and like that's not me. That's not like I don't go to that in stress. What?
Yeah.
And then it was like weeks later, after reading all that, it was like, oh, I just did that. Oh snap! Like, what? And so it's like learning those pieces that you didn't really see until you're discovering. Then you like start looking back basically, and you're like, oh, I used to do that as a child. Oh, like for me, like the helper is the one who's to always go and do things for others. And I remember I would always go to my friends' houses and clean their rooms. And I'd be like, I'm here to help you so that there's peace between your parents and like we get to hang out. And then it was like I would go home and my mom would be like, go to your room. I'm like, no. But it was a sense of like I get to be there for my friend. I get to help them. And then it's like it slowly transferred into like serving in ministry and now.
Well, it's almost putting a face to a name, like of who you are and like why you operate the way that you do. I feel like that's so getting these types is also super helpful to have because it's like that is like me, and I'm also not alone in this world because other people feel like me.
I always thought I was a special snowflake.
You are a snowflake for sure.
And now and now that I know I'm just like every
White
other
as
2.
snow.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess the utility I found in it was more relational with my wife. Like, because other than that, like, I don't care. Whatever. But as far as, like, trying to understand Bethany better, we think she's a 7. And so in that sense, like, if I can try to kind of understand her motivation, I mean, obviously apart from like speaking with her and like asking her questions, just that can help me just be a better husband, and maybe even explain why I need what I need, why I'm so needy. So it can just kind of help do some of that kind of stuff. And it's the latest trend, and we all know I'm on all the latest trends.
It's true. You said
I'm on fleek.
that was 2 years ago.
That was
So old.
we're just gonna pretend like that didn't happen.
It feels good to laugh again. Okay, so one thing I'm curious, and this doesn't just have to do with the Enneagram. You can take Christmas, you can take Halloween, you can take any kind of thing. I recently listened to a podcast that went off kind of on the Enneagram. Not a huge fan, this podcast, but gave a lot of interesting kind of historical stuff on personality tests in general, and even the person who did the Enneagram and where it came from, yada, yada, yada. To summarize, let's just say kind of occulty, and even using similar imagery to the occult and that little circle star business, whatever. Okay, so there's this test that has potential. I'll just even say potentially because I haven't looked it up. Maybe this person lied to me. Potentially, it has roots in the occult. What then utility does a Christian have saying like, oh, I'm gonna take advice from this thing with roots in the occult? Is there redemption in it?
Yeah, well,
Yes or
I
no?
mean, if we're gonna go historical on this, then the Christian church pushed against psychology and counseling. I mean, even on like just a social sort of level, there is a very not too long ago history of like, oh no, we don't get counseling or talk about that. And I'm sure like there's pockets, but it was not popular to be going into that. And now living where we're at, we realized, oh my gosh, that was actually, it is a great thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do in your life, and to be who God made you to be and push you further in understanding yourself and how to work in the world. I would say the Enneagram, I would say maybe there's still some truth in it, regardless of its sources that we can take. So instead of throwing out baby with the bathwater, it's separate all the crud that surrounds it and pull out the truth that might actually be in there. That's not always true, and it's a sticky situation. If it actually did come from a cult, or the occult, I should say, you might get something stuck in there. But there's two sides to go at that. You can either be very conservative with it, in that we don't want even a little sliver of anything, or to find a little sliver that we could later cut off, I guess, or the other side of saying this is so beneficial, there might be some crud in there, we'll weed it out later on, sort of thing. So that's kind of my take on that. What do you think?
I think my mind just goes to like, what, like if they're saying it's this cult and stuff like that, but it's like, okay, what are those people taking? And so it's like, I'm going to take these certain things, but ultimately it's me who takes it into my heart, and I'm taking it to God and the truth that comes from God. And so going back from, it's like, okay, I can see all these things that are listed that can form into this, oh, you're going to be this, and like all those different arrows and stuff. But like ultimately it's, you take those things out, you put them in front of you and say, okay, God, this is who you've created me to be. And if this is not, like, show me that, reveal that to me. And yeah, ultimately laying it in front of him instead of being like, okay, if it is, there's still going to be like, it's still going to be used for his glory. It's kind of like we were talking about just with, like, kind of off topic of just Kanye's music and, like, how...
Brought up the
Jesus is king.
how, like, that is such a constant... I don't know the word right now, but, like, it's so weird for people right now. And it's like, okay, why is he doing this? But it's like, we've talked about just Paul and, like, how, okay... Well, Paul was in jail and did all these things and murdered and stuff, but he ultimately... People were still doing the correct things. They were still preaching the gospel and still reaching people for
People
God.
were trying to stir up trouble for him by preaching the gospel in a way, hoping to get him hurt. And he said, hey, people are hearing the gospel. Praise be to God.
Yeah, and it's like God can still be glorified even if it's from a cult and even if it's from this, like, whole different area, basically. It's ultimately how you take it, basically, and where you bring it to next, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to take this cult and I'm going to show everyone about this cult. Like, let's join it as a cult.
I think it could also, that was great, and that just got my brain going, that it could also be taken in it's very easy for us to think that we have a perfect system of church set up. We don't. We really don't. It is...
Tell that to a reformed.
Doug, get down here. We call him out a lot, by the way. Maybe we need to back off.
Yeah. We love you, Doug, truly.
Doug is a very, very smart man.
Super smart.
And it is fun to have those conversations with him. Anyways, so the church and how we operate and all that kind of stuff, it is... some of it is based as scripture, and some of it is culturally based, and it's more man-structured and that kind of stuff. It's not a perfect system, and we need to be refining it in Christ, and by taking that lead on there. You could say the same thing of these personality tests. Coming out of the occult, that if there is something useful that is a benefit to knowing ourselves and who God made us to be, that we bring that before Him, He will do the refining around it. He will shape it in a way that actually is more beneficial to us. And because we can say like, oh yeah, we'll find the crud inside of it and be the ones to cut it out, but shoot, I'm still trying to figure out how to do that in my life, like on so many stuff. I'm blind to a lot of things, and so yeah, that's definitely a necessary point in approaching anything that has to do with identity or who we are or something like that. Being able to bring it before Christ and say, have your way with this and show me what's true.
Well, even kind of, sorry, but like
Do it.
we were talking about just like a while ago about the Enneagram test, and like how when we were taking it for like the leadership, and I was like sitting there, I was like, I already know my type. I already know what I am. I'm gonna nail it. But then it's
myself.
like, I was like, I'm gonna be a 2. It's great. But I internally was like, but I like get those feelings sometimes, and it's like, ultimately I know who I am, but there was that moment of anxiety of like, what if it shows me I'm different? And so I had to literally like take it and be like, okay, God, like whatever the test is, like that just shows like who you've created me to be, and use that. But I definitely freaked out for days and was like, oh my gosh, I'm not a 2. Like, who am I? Like, but I like rooted my identity in that and was like, this is who I am, and I can't be anything else. Like,
So, okay. Well,
I got a question off of that, but you go.
on the last thing, just really
was
quick, I'm not necessarily one of those, like, you can't get anything good from anything that doesn't have godly roots.
I'm not one of those mamby-pamby.
No, but
those,
I mean, in general, it's like
Yeah.
all truth is God's truth, and you can find God's truth in a multitude of places.
Check out our Truth podcast.
Otherwise, never watch movies, never listen to music unless it's fully correctly, always glorifying to God, yada. So I'm not necessarily saying like we shouldn't, but as far as it's good to be aware of these things,
Right.
Because I would say we as people tend to, kind of like you were just talking about, and then we can get to your question. People a lot of times do internalize things without realizing that they've internalized things, and they really do start to build foundations on things that could or could not be shaky if they're not being as wise as you and saying, this is who I think I am, take away whatever's not me.
Yeah.
Like, so, and maybe I'm cynical about humans and I just did customer service too long and people are idiots or whatever, but a lot of people don't do that, I think. Maybe they do.
Yeah.
But if they don't do that, they need to. Otherwise, you can be led down different paths and box yourself in, which we'll get to. Question.
And that's the interesting thing. You touched on it. My desire of who I want to be. And then to be afraid to let that go is such an interesting dynamic with it. And you even said at the top of like, well, I knew what I wanted it to turn out to be, and so I shaped it.
Right.
And we're always trying to work on this sort of image, even if it's not for other people and it's just for ourselves. Like, we hold these weird values. And maybe the Enneagram reinforces that for some people of like, well, yeah, I'm going to hold on to this and then never let it go. Or maybe it pushes us to be able to realize I have been trying to be something that actually isn't me. And it could either come through getting a different result on the test or just having this conversation right here, which without the Enneagram, we may never have had this conversation to begin with. a little bit more goodness that can come out of something that may not always be the 100% pure or most accurate thing in the world.
All right, so let's talk some of the potential negatives. I'm going to put Linnea on blast here for a sec.
The
Bring it
negatives.
Okay.
Negatives.
The negatives. That's not where I was
No,
going. with
that sounds that sounds like
So the first I took the test initially, and I was a 1 wing 2, which is the perfectionist / helper or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, I guess that's what I am. I was like, nothing in myself makes me think I'm a perfectionist in any way, shape, or form. But I read some of the stuff on it, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, that kind of sounds like me. But like, it didn't fully sit right. And so months later, I retook it and found out I'm like more of a 2, and my next one is like a 9 or something. So I'm basically
That's
U2.
291 or something like that.
Yeah.
296, yeah.
And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I sent a text to some people I thought might care.
Yeah.
Some family members, Linnea, whatever. Didn't hear back from
And
Linnea.
nobody did care.
For a couple days.
Oh.
And I talked to her on Monday. I was like,
And that's
whoa.
why we've brought you here.
I was like,
You-
whoa,
confront
You
me.
need to respond to these things.
what's up with leaving me on red? So cool.
Wow.
You don't. Yeah.
And we ended up having a really interesting conversation. I thought that was, I think, encouraging to both of us. And the initial...
encouraging too. I feel bad now.
No, I thought it was encouraging. I thought
He
it was
only
good.
cried a little bit that night.
Because ultimately, why didn't you respond to me initially?
Because
No shame.
because I didn't see you as a 2 at first. I thought more so like just learning the personality test, and
Right.
I honestly forget what I said and why I didn't see you as a 2, but I think it was just more of like I ultimately saw myself as myself as a 2, and so I categorized all the things that I did. And I'm like, he's not doing all that stuff. He's not like it was just one of those things where I, in a sense, put like my identity as a 2 on you, and was like, no, you're not doing that. You're not a 2. And I was like, because of the ways you do things and how they're different than the ways I do things, and so it threw me for a loop, and I was like, no, he's like because I know that you guys are very similar, and I was like, oh, he's a 9 because you guys get along great, and you both kind of operate in similar ways, and just from being around you guys, and so I was like, oh
Messy, smelly. Yep. All boxes are checked.
Check.
no.
Yeah. So I mean, we had a great talk that came from that I think taught me some stuff, taught you some stuff, and you know, I mean, it is what it is. I think we all have a tendency to do that. We judge people kind of based on ourselves and based off all sorts of various characteristics. And you mentioned something interesting in that conversation that historically in like youth groups you've had to take, I don't know if it's Enneagram, maybe it's Myers-Briggs, probably. And you noticed some stuff that was happening among the leaders within that.
Like when you talked about when I was in high school, in the student leadership team for our youth group, we had to do the Myers-Briggs test. And so then we learned all each other's personality types. We had to stand in separate boxes. Also, Doug was my youth pastor at the time, so it makes sense.
Yeah, Doug. Strengths. So you learned strengths, you learned weaknesses.
Yeah, we learned who each other was, and so then we learned to categorize who each other was, and so we learned. So I would say I'm an ENFP, and my one of my best friends is an ISTJ, exact opposite from each other, and it made
You became enemies.
we were enemies at the time, and it made sense because we thought differently, but we literally just saw the different types and was like, so like we would do certain things as a group and friends and be like, oh, we're all extroverts here, like you're an introvert, you don't want to hang out with us right now because you need your alone time, and like, but then it was like and we saw those things as bad, and we're like, okay, and then like, but then the thinkers would come over to the feelers, and we'd be like, they would start being like, why are you crying? Why? And we'd be like, because I'm feeling like I'm just having emotions. And it was just like, we didn't get the aspect, the truth behind it of like, this is how we're going to operate. We just saw each other as those letters and was like, that's who you are. I don't care about anything else. And that honestly, like, it killed a lot of my friendships at moments. And I'm friends with those people now, but it's still like, it took a lot of like scraping.
Yeah.
Like for my best friend who's exact opposite as me, she's a person I go to. She's a person who knows how to combat the other side of me. Who knows that, who knows how to get me back to like, okay, I need to sit and have alone time. Or I need to think about how I'm feeling right now. Or I need to make a checklist because I'm just random sometimes. And I'm like, okay, I'll do this and this and this and this. And it's like, it's those things that like I've learned over the years. But in high school, it really was damaging. I'm thankful for it, but it was damaging.
Yeah, I mean, because we like things to make sense. When something starts making sense and we all kind of have a common base, it's pretty easy to categorize each other. And so, like I think Doug's an 8, Matt's a 1. Most people are like 2s, a couple 9s.
6s.
And so it would be easy, and maybe it's even beneficial, but it would be easy to be like, okay, we have this event coming up, and it requires us to like serve people.
Right.
Well, 8s don't do that. 8s are the proclaimers. They're the ones who did it, whatever.
Or even worse, when someone's like stressed out, be like, I know exactly how to talk to this person. It's like, okay, fine, they're an 8, and so you need to approach them with this sort of manner,
Right.
or whatever. But not always true. Like,
Right.
yeah.
And so one of the dangers I see is like when it comes to like being within the church, we need volunteer positions, and some people could be like, oh, man, I really have a heart to do that, but like my personality type, my whatever, we can this thing that's supposed to kind of help us frame who we are ends up boxing us in. And
keeps us from being able to stretch ourselves beyond ourselves to be able to do growth, like have growth in our lives.
Right. I mean, and you kind of see it in Moses a little bit in the Old Testament. God's like, hey, Moses, go tell my people, let my people go. And he's like, I'm not a leader. Like, I don't really speak well. Like, I don't think you can do anything with me. like that is someone who knew themselves, who told God, you got the wrong guy. And there's a huge danger in us doing that. I was talking to another one of my friends who's going to Bayside Thrive School or whatever. And she's, they have to put together some kind of like sermon or something like that. And she's just like this isn't me. Like, I can't do this. I'm like, you can, because God is in you and God is empowering you and transforming you. I've heard so many times, like, I know that's the way you do it. I know, this, that, or the other thing, but God didn't make me that way. God made me this way. And so it stunts our growth. Like, if we have that mindset, what is the transforming power of Jesus for? Like, our life should be a journey of change, being more and more like Christ. Maybe we have this base, like, okay, I kind of have a base understanding.
And maybe like an awareness to know how we personally will go forward. Because that's really what these are, is knowing yourself at the end of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But we need to, as Christians empowered by the Spirit, we need to move beyond our numbers, move beyond our, I don't know what Myers-Briggs calls them. Like, we need to move beyond those letters and just be like, no, ultimately Christ defines me. Maybe this is like one little stop on that trek, but I can't let this just be the stop.
Not use it to enable yourself to not grow or to continue to sin or anything like that. Don't use Don't use this new knowledge. Don't use your freedom to justify your sinning
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, you even think about it, like, just as my own journey of moving out here, it's like, I moved because I was comfortable in Colorado. I was sitting in the same spot, doing the same thing over and over again, and I knew that I was going to do that for the next how many ever years. And, like, if I didn't move, if I didn't listen to God for that growth, and like Moses did, and be like, okay, you need to do this, like, I wouldn't be sitting here. And I, like, even think of, like, the leadership aspect of I'm always the server. I'm always the one below, because I have a hard time believing in myself to be at this level of a leader. And for a long time, even just, like, stepping into the role of assistant director of children's ministry, it was hard, because I'm like, I'm not a leader of the church. I can never be. I'm not a leader. And it's scary at times, because I have to remind myself of, it's not you, Linnea, who put you in this position. It is God who believes in you, and the people around you who believe in you to be in that position. But we see ourselves as only these certain things, and it's like, yeah, one of my spiritual gifts is not leadership, and, like, but that's okay, because I get to grow in
down.
it. Well,
Joke.
I hope that's a joke.
Huge joke.
Yeah.
Not a funny one.
It's okay.
Offensive. I feel like there's a good dynamic between chaos and order amidst all of this.
Jordan Peterson.
I'm not trying to JP this right now, but I will say our proclivity to box things up is, in a sense, trying to control the chaos of human beings and trying to understand them the best that we possibly can. And we do it not just with personality tests, we do it by political parties, we do it by religions, we do it by as many things as we can possibly think of. And part of that is we want a community, we want a sense of belonging, to know that we're not the only twos out there. Yeah. Even though it's jarring to find out other people are also twos who we never suspected would be like us.
Who are just total selfish jerks.
No.
She did not say that.
I did not say that.
And so like there's this balance between the two, though, but understanding that the order is the bigger box around all of this, which is, as you said, our identity in Jesus Christ, our foundation of God. So this Enneagram stuff is perfectly fine in being able to just identify this stuff, but understanding that this is not where order is. This is a surface level, just kind of understanding and knowing where to bounce off of and keep going. But that everything else is founded upon Christ, founded upon what he has done in our lives. And so we should first base our decisions and our actions and our growth and all that kind of stuff upon that. We should bring this personality stuff into the fold of what that identity is, not vice versa. Because typically that's the temptation is, well, you can say, this is how God made me, and you're totally right. Like, this is a sign of it. But as Bryce was saying, we're being transformed, and sometimes that might pull us out of our two-ness entirely or our nine-ness entirely to be something brave, to be something bold, to just not look like ourselves as what we once thought we were supposed to be. That's more of a synopsis of what was just all said right there.
I mean, I think that's good, because maybe left to our own devices, apart from Christ, like, maybe that's the best we can do. Maybe the best we can do is kind of be the way we were made, like, be our number. But we as Christians, that's not it. We are, 2 Corinthians 5:17, a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. So the way God made you doesn't matter, because the new has come at this point. So we need to kind of hold on to that, be like, okay, what is that new? And maybe the Enneagram can bring you closer to that, maybe you can't, whatever. But live with kind of boldness and joy in that, because God does empower us to do awesome things way more than I give him credit for, way more than I even utilize. Like, there's way more that I could do for God's kingdom that I'm like, oh, but that's hard. Yeah. Like, it is hard to stretch yourself into.
It's chaotic. You're entering into the chaos.
Yeah, and it's so easy to just not. It's so easy to just be like, but this is my wheelhouse. This is my safe zone. This is like this is like a little effort, but not too much. You know.
Just enough.
So that's kind of my fear, plus the judgment bit. You know, where like someone could, because I've had the same thought, like, but really you're that? Because I read that and that doesn't sound like you. Like, those are the two things that kind of make me wary of them. But I ultimately agree with you. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Don't throw babies. That's
rule one, guys.
Please don't do that.
That is rule one.
I mean, you work in children's ministry. Are we wrong?
No.
Yeah,
Not wrong.
there you go.
Please don't throw babies.
But
Title.
Please don't throw babies.
so let's kind of end. I mean, unless you have kind of somewhere else you want to go with it.
I've got about 3 more hours of things to know.
What are some just kind of closing thoughts? I'll get rid of my negative Nancy and I'll give it to you guys. What are just some thoughts that you have that kind of tie the concept of personality tests in with like a biblical faith and how those can kind of, I know that's kind of a big question to just toss out at you, but I'm going to do it.
Do you want to go first?
What do you think?
That's a good question. You wanna take this?
I mean, I can. Well, you're gonna take it. We're gonna both take it.
Yeah.
Let's tag team this.
Okay.
How to tie those two things together? Okay. Well, I think it's important to know who God made you to be, and I think this is a great starting off point.
Yeah.
All of the personality tests, including energy levels and things, I've heard. As much as we can point out all these negatives and do that kind of stuff, I've heard so many great things, like what it's done for marriages, what it's done for friendships. I know what it's done for me in friendships, and also knowing myself, and being able to understand certain things that I do that fall typically in this, in the category of like the 9 or the INFP or whatever. But it's important to know who God made you to be. It's also important not to hold too tightly to this stuff, because it's all things developed interacting in an imperfect world. And so it's that we want to move forward letting Christ be the dictator of our, I said that weird, being the dictator of where we go and who we become. And of course, because we're in a fallen world and we're going to remain in the fallen world until we die, this is always a great point to start off with, and maybe even a great point of where Christ begins the conversation with you about, here's the things that are going on inside of you, here's the beautiful things and the things that sin has kind of gotten a hold of that I want to take out. Like, there's so much benefit within it, and there's so much benefit for our relationships. But again, as Linnea profoundly said, bring it before God and let him do the work and let him define you and show you the way.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just like thinking all of the different things, but it's just, yeah, there's so many different good aspects to take from these personality tests, but also just the aspect that they can relate to God, but it's ultimately remembering who it is, like who is your identity, because we can get wrapped up in like, okay, we are these things, but it's also allowing God to be accepting, I guess, more so of if you don't get that number that you think you are, that it's okay, because God's growing you in that, and he's going to transform you in that other way, and it's not your way, and it's not your way of thinking that you need to be doing, and it's like...
It's Yahweh.
It's Yahweh. That was good. But yeah, wow. It's just ultimately like seeing those character descriptions of yourself and being like, okay, I know these things, and I can either hold on to them and say, okay, this is who I am, and I'm always going to be that person, or I can put them aside and say, okay, God, use these to glorify you and to show me who I am, because it's good to figure out those parts of you that you don't think about and that you don't ultimately see, and like those areas that you go to and you're like, oh, okay, cool. But it's like, okay, God, use that and show me how to use that, basically. Let him be your personality test key.
Ooh. The
But,
GOD test, of course.
Yeah,
That's good.
I would say I put the Enneagram kind of in the same category as I would like any Christian author. Now, maybe it has some different roots or whatever.
Yeah.
But like you can read Christian authors. I'll even put some big boys in there. A.W. Tozer, C.S. Lewis, Ravi Zacharias, like some of those people who are like super godly. But ultimately, they are not God's word. They are trying to unpack godly truths from his scripture. And so in that sense, you can pull truths out of those, even if there are imperfections within the logic. So what I'm excited about when it kind of comes to this conversation, and just like anyone who's striving to get to know who God made them so they can ultimately serve him better, because that's the goal of Christians, to serve God, to share the gospel and all that kind of stuff, is that God will use all of these imperfect methods because he is the author and perfecter of faith. He can use all the imperfections in the world to bring about free people who are living in freedom in a way that they've never lived before. And maybe it starts from a place of idiocy and brokenness, but I think that's just called humanity. And so if it is the Enneagram, great. If you don't care about the Enneagram and you think it's stupid, great. Who cares? But we should strive to know who we are in Christ and use that. Don't let it box us in, and just really strive to serve him. And I'd love to hear if any of you have taken it, what your thoughts on it are. Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's great? Has it helped you? Has it helped your marriage? Any of that kind of stuff. We would love to hear you. Mark, Bryce, or Linnea at foothillcp.org and at foothillcp on Twitter and all that good stuff. And
the YouTubes
oh yeah, and
right now.
yeah, foothillcp.org/YouTube.
Right down in that comment section, slap that like button and hit subscribe.
Yeah. Thanks, Linnea. Thanks for hanging out with us.
That's what I
Really
do.
appreciate it. Crushed it. See you guys.